Hey guys, it's Joel and welcome back to the channel and to what is arguably one of the greatest cars of all time in modern history, the L322 Range Rover. This one being my beautiful 2002 BMW V8 4.4 litre petrol example that I acquired for just the measly sum of £2,000 a few weeks ago. Now, Range Rover content and Range Rovers in general attract two types of people, either those that absolutely love to hate these cars or people that absolutely love these cars. And I think you can differentiate the two in one very simple way. The people that tend to hate these cars are people that have never owned them. They're people that had a mate down the pub that once owned one, who had a few problems with it and decided to not only tell everyone in the pub but write about it all over Facebook, in the forums and everywhere else online. And then there's the people that love them, which generally tend to be owners. And that for me tells me more or less everything you need to know. Now, of course, there's going to be some discrepancies there. There will be people that have owned these cars that have had a really bad time of it. I find that most of those stories tend to come from people who have owned new Range Rovers as the customer service these days. I mean, let's not even talk about Jaguar, but the Jaguar Land Rover customer service doesn't tend to be the best, and reliability of the newer models hasn't always proven to be the best either. But for L322 owners, for those of us who get into it knowing what we're getting into, it's well worth it. And that's exactly the key. I bought this £2,000 L322 knowing exactly what I was getting into. Hell, this isn't my first L322. I've had 3 of them now, and the first one was 4 years ago now in 2021. I've had my fair share of bills with these cars and I know what to expect. And so today we are going to be talking about some bills and looking at the true reason why this car was so cheap. But first I want to share with you some anecdotal experience from my time with this car. Now, I have had this probably 6 weeks actually at the time of filming this, and my odometer tells me that I've done now just over 800 miles in this car. Thing is, I didn't buy this car to be the daily driver. I've got plenty of other things to choose from at the moment. I've got my Porsche Cayenne, which was my daily driver. Very lovely car to drive. It's got wireless Apple CarPlay, beautifully reliable actually. My SLK, my Saab, might be forgetting a few others, and obviously my Maserati, which is in the garage, not drivable yet. But the thing is, compared to all of those cars and almost anything else, even when I've had brand new press cars on the driveway and I've got this, 9 times out of 10, you just want to get in the L322. And it's not because I'm deluded or crazy. In fact, anyone that's owned one of these cars, as well as lots of others, will tell you that there is just something about them that, well, it's hard to explain, but there's just nothing else that drives like them or makes you feel the way you do. Put it this way, this is the only car that I own or have ever owned that makes me want to drive under the speed limit. Not to annoy other road users, but just because I'm not bothered about getting anywhere fast. And oftentimes when you arrive at your destination, you sit in the car for just a little bit longer because you just don't want to get out of it. So that's why I've accrued 850 miles in this thing in quite a short amount of time, even when I've been using other cars, because it is just the nicest possible thing I could be driving. Not to mention, as it's a Range Rover and these were 70, 80 grand before inflation 20 years ago when they came out, it's got heated steering wheel, it's got heated seats, it's got lots of nice electronics that make life very easy, and it's wonderfully comfortable with the air suspension and just the adjustability on these seats. There's nothing quite like it. However, if we start going for a little drive, this is probably a good time to share with you a quite concerning figure that I've worked out. So I have reset it a couple of times, and actually there's my Cayenne, which was my primary car before buying this. It was my daily driver. I used to moan a lot about the fuel economy in that thing. It averages, it's weird, 20, 21, but it doesn't matter if you drive it really aggressively or really smoothly. It's sort of 20, 21, which I thought was shocking. This L322, since I bought it, it's on 15.5. Now, admittedly, I have been using this a lot for the runs to the supermarket and just train station lifts and relatively short journeys. I found that when I drove it home from buying it up in the Midlands, which is still probably the longest journey I did in this car, I averaged just, I think, about 20. Now, the thing is with that is I didn't remember it being quite that bad. I knew it'd be slightly worse than the Cayenne. I was expecting high teens. I have noticed a few symptoms with this car over the few weeks that I've been driving it. Number one is the gearbox. It seems to be a little bit hesitant when it's cold, which, you know, isn't too much of a worry. but it's more the fact that it seems to be slipping a little bit. And there's this sort of low down rumble at around 2000 RPM when you're under a bit of load, which, having done some more research, sounds like something to do potentially with the torque converter release plate, something like that. Something's gearbox related, indicative of a potential gearbox rebuild issue. And that could also be contributing to a worse fuel economy than expected if the clutch is indeed slipping. There was also a horrific knocking coming from the front left suspension, which I've had again in my previous Jivany Green Range Rover. Never got to the bottom of it, but there's all sorts of suspension components that can cause that sort of knocking. And then also a little bit of an oil burning smell, especially after longer drives where I guess the car would get hotter. When you parked up, this sort of, yeah, quite distinct oil burning smell. Not like brake discs or anything like that, or clutch even, just an oil burning smell. And so what I've just done is taken this car over to a Land Rover specialist. I decided it was probably worthwhile getting this thing inspected by some proper experts. And so just a couple of days ago, I took this car over to Glen Rands, who are a Jaguar Land Rover specialist based down in Hampshire near a place called Parsfield. And I dropped it off with them for a full inspection, a health check if you like. And I also wanted them to get to the bottom of that knocking issue because it's extremely, extremely annoying. And well, I'm pleased to report, as I'm conveniently pulling up at this place's natural home of the petrol station, as it really needs some, I'm pleased to report I've got some answers for you. So let's pull up here and have a little chat. So I want to say thank you to a couple of my viewers actually who commented, I think on the video initially when I bought this car, recommending these people Glen Rands Land Rover. So I decided to ring them up, book the car in for a health check as mentioned, and I dropped the car off there last week and was very impressed actually for a couple of reasons. I was firstly quite impressed by their customer service. I thought it was absolutely brilliant. I'll get into that a little bit more if you watch a little longer on, but also at the situation with this car. So they did have the car for a full day. They ran a number of tests on the car, and the first thing they did was investigate that issue with the suspension for me. Now, I was expecting it probably to be a job for maybe a couple of control arms at the front, and you sort of tend to do everything else along that goes with it. I don't know, anti-roll bars, drop links, things like that. However, I was very wrong, and in probably the first time in L322 history, I received a bill far, far lower than expected. Turns out the investigate knocking noise, they found the front suspension arm retaining bolts had not been correctly torqued. No noise found when correctly tightened. Yeah, that's literally it. The control arm, for some reason, the bolts hadn't been torqued correctly, and so they were just rattling around in their sort of socket, knocking away as I drove along. It sort of didn't discriminate whether you were going fast or slow or over a bump. It would just be sort of constantly donking away. And so when I saw that it was literally just a case of tightening up the bolts, well, I couldn't have been happier. And surely enough, even when I went to pick the car up, I thought, surely it's not fixed the knocking. But I don't know if you heard me just driving up here, you may have noticed just how silent this thing is now. There is no knocking whatsoever. And so they just tightened them up for me, and that was that. I couldn't quite believe it. They then carried out a 28-point vehicle health check, of which I've got the report here. And if I show you this page, just like this, you'll notice there's a lot of green. And again, I've never experienced anything quite like this with an L322, let alone a £2,000 one. And again, the thing with this car is it's in such a gorgeous specification that I thought surely there's going to be something really bad here. And there is actually. It's not all good, but I'm just trying to keep this positive to start with. Stay tuned if you want to hear the bad stuff, because there is a few bad bits. But yeah, road test, green. Operation of handbrake, green. Lights working correctly, green. Windscreen wipers, green. All the normal stuff. Engine oil level correct, green. Engine coolant, green. Brake fluid is an amber, because actually they don't know when it was last changed, and I need to go through my records and let them know, because I haven't actually done that yet. Maybe we could have a little look today. Drive belt condition, green. And yeah, a whole nother page actually of greens, some ambers, which I'll get to in a minute. Suspension, green. Brakes, green. I could go on. Tyres, green. So initially and overall, even still, despite what I'm about to tell you, I was very impressed because I really didn't know. I mean, the knocking was bad when I was driving the car around, but there wasn't, other than the symptoms with the gearbox and the smelly oil, I had no real reason to believe that there was going to be problems. But these were and are complicated cars. They're heavy cars, so that, you know, physics means that they're heavier on components that every single car has. And so normally you would expect quite a long list of small things, which obviously, when taken to a reputable specialist, it quickly adds up to a few £1,000s. However, it hasn't been the case with this. But if you look here, I have still got an invoice for, dun 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 dun, where's the number? £1,427.68. Now, why is that? So let's get to the interesting stuff. So the engine I mentioned, I thought there was some sort of smelly issue. Now they have found, very common on these L322s with the M62 block, the engine oil is leaking from the left and right valve cover gaskets. So it needs both cam cover gaskets replaced and that all fixed up at a cost of £467.27. That's 3 hours of labour at £130 an hour. It's quite expensive labour, I have to say, and 2 lots of cam cover gaskets at about 40 quid each. Then, slightly bigger issue, which I guess I hadn't suspected it to be like this, but they have said that there is a gearbox issue, and it's with the gearbox sump. So the transmission oil is leaking from the gearbox sump, and they advise to replace the sump and filter with new oil. So actually, it's not that bad. It basically just needs a gearbox service is what they're saying. Now, after doing a bit more research, I think it might need a little bit more than that. I think it might need a bit of an engine rebuild, gearbox rebuild. If my suspicions about this clutch plate or torque converter plate are true, the way it sort of slips and hums at certain RPMs and loads, I think it might need a bit more than this, but they have said as a starting point to absolutely do this and rule out anything else. And they've quoted me for this £722.46, and these are all plus VAT, by the way, or excluding VAT. And that's for obviously a gearbox sump gasket, gearbox filter kit, the O-ring, and the 8 litres of gearbox fluid, and only 2 hours of labour on that. Now, probably something I could actually do at home, but with things as sensitive as a gearbox and engine on a car as lovely as this, I'm very happy to pay professionals to do a perfect job. And I'll tell you why I'm actually happy to pay these guys, because, and I had no prior communications with them about anything to do with YouTube beforehand, but I was really impressed because they basically did that health check. They fixed up the bolts on the suspension for me for a very small charge of £130 to sort of have that whole once over, which, yeah, you may say actually you shouldn't have to pay for that. It was very quick, but I thought that was very reasonable. They had the car a whole day, they gave it a proper look over, they sorted the suspension knock. It cost me 130 quid, so I couldn't have been happier. But then when I went to pick the car up, not only were they absolutely lovely, but they'd given the thing a full detail. It looks absolutely wonderful now. Yes, I've driven it a little bit since and it's getting a bit dirty, but it looked absolutely exquisite, and this interior looks absolutely fantastic. So I was really, really impressed with them, and thus I would be happy to go back and get this work done. And that is my intention. So I have got a quote for £1,427.68. We have since communicated, and I've said that I would like to book it in. So I'm doing that now. I'm going to book this car in for this work, and they said that they could take some photos and videos for me to include in subsequent videos. So if you want to hear more about that, then subscribe now and make sure you like this video so I know you're enjoying the L322 content. They did supply a couple of photos to back up the issues with the gearbox and the engine, but essentially I think even paying retail price for these repairs, £130 an hour isn't cheap. I can't imagine that's far off main dealer, to be honest, but even so, paying 1,500 quid, I'll be into this for about 3.5 grand, which, to be honest, if this was advertised for 3.5 grand, I probably still would have bought it. It's a lovely, lovely thing, and I think well worth spending the money. So sorry to disappoint all of you naysayers out there about the horrific unreliability of these cars. Now, I could be jinxing it, of course, and I don't want to do that, but this is a car that has been very well looked after. In fact, I'll just give you a little glimpse of some of the receipts from the last owner. It's had a lot of work done. I do need to go in here and have a look at exactly when the brake fluid was changed, because it'd be very much worth getting them to do a service on the brakes while it's in there if it's not been done recently. But these cars, when they're maintained well, can be a pleasure to live with, and I've generally found that to be my experience. It's just keeping on top of the maintenance and being prepared for £1,500 bills for basically a gearbox oil change and fairly easy engine repair. So yeah, a lot of you will be shouting saying don't pay 1,500 quid, do it yourself. But for the amount of stress it will cause me and time it will take me to do a good job on that, for the peace of mind paying 1,500 quid for these brilliant people that I've just met to do it, I'm very happy to do so. So that'll be the next thing, booking it in, and I'll give you guys an update on how it drives afterwards. And then, well actually, you're going to be very excited to see what I'm doing with this shortly after. So there's an update on the car. There's why this thing was so cheap, because it does need money spent on it. But I think you can agree that is not that bad a prognosis for a £2,000, 125,000 mile, 23-year-old L322 Range Rover with arguably the probably least reliable of the engines in these early L322s. I'm very happy with it, and I hope you guys are too. Thank you so much for watching. Please, as I say, do subscribe if you're not already. Like this video if you like the L322 content. Basically, whatever gets more likes, I post more of. It gives me a good indication of what you enjoy. And I'll see you all in the next one very, very soon.